Welcome back to Follow the Rabbit, hosted by Johannes Deske and me, Igor Schwarzman. Follow the Rabbit is the podcast where we decode cultural phenomena and help you update your mental models. So, what happens when you start scribbling quotes from a book during lockdown and accidentally create a 4-year creative practice? Well, today we're joined by Christy George, who sent us what might be the longest and most thoughtful email in podcast history, which perfectly embodies her approach to everything. Her email started a conversation, and this episode is pretty much the result of exactly that. Sometimes beautiful things really can start by writing a long and heartfelt email. Believe. Christy is an investor, producer, and now writer who during the pandemic began creating what she calls an illustrated book report inspired by Jenny Odell's How to Do Nothing. What started as a simple note-taking evolved into 200 handmade pages, now bound into a book, and has now become an exhibition as well as an event series, helping others, among many things, make sense of their pandemic experiences. In this conversation, we explore why Christy ships her books one by one to people she knows, refuses to optimize for scale, and receives weekly Google Docs from strangers sharing their own creative journeys. We dig into the politics of memory, why practice, the air quotable one, deserves to lose its pretentious air quotes, and how making something deliberately inefficient might be the most radical act in our optimized world. We tried to do both justice to Jenny's provide no deliverables by also delivering a personal, entertaining, and hopefully enlightening episode. As always, we're interested in your feedback, questions, or suggestions for future guests. You can leave us a comment, subscribe on your favorite platform. Do we have them anymore? Anyway, you can also just send us an email at ftr@knownunknowns.xyz. We would love to hear from you. With that, here's the episode. Hello. How's it going? We're here with Christy George, and I feel like Christy was, not the only one who reached out because of we are recording this podcast for about a year now, but it was definitely the nicest email I think that we both received because of this, and
the longest,
and
also
the longest,
true.
For sure, the longest.
yes. And so, but it's not only, we're not having Christy on because she then can, tell everyone how much she liked this podcast. No, she actually worked on something that we find also quite curious and interesting. And after, exchanging a few emails, having a couple of conversations, we decided to have her on and talk about the project that she worked on for quite a while now, which is now a book, and it has a lot to do with curiosity. So, Christy, welcome to Follow the Rabbit. Who are you? Tell the people who you are.
Thanks for starting with such an existential question. And thanks for having me. I appreciate that I may be introduced by the length of my emails. I may need to work on that. But it's actually very related to the project in some way, which just kind of went on and on and on and on. I'm an investor, a producer, and now a writer. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I started working on a personal project, what I now call an illustrated book report inspired by Jenny Odell's book, How to Do Nothing, which I had read when it first came out and loved it and gave it to everybody I knew, and then kept coming back to it at the beginning of the pandemic because I found that Jenny in that book unknowingly had predicted so many dynamics that would come to really define that weird time, both around the interconnectedness of species and ways to resist the attention economy and ways in which we're complicit. And I started just by scribbling quotes from the book that I liked and wanted to remember. I tend not to remember things if I don't write them down. And much like my email to you, it just kept going and going and going. I have a visual aid. So now what started as just a couple of quotes scribbled on paper by hand 4 years later, turned into 200 handmade pages that eventually I bound into this book and is now an exhibition and an event series. And I write long emails to people and then we do stuff together. So that has now become the project.
Cool. I mean, it's quite a journey.
Yeah, journey is one way of calling it.
What would you call it?
Yeah, no, I've sort of been like, every time I write journey these days, I have to write it in quotes, but until I realize like, oh, I am that person. I'm on a journey. So it is
Right.
that, and it gives me sympathy for everyone on their own journeys. I think I'm on my own journey is something like I wrote a thing that was just for myself, and then I have had the absolute pleasure of experiencing what it's like to share something personal that was just for you with other people and have it turn into something else entirely. Like the journey I think I'm on now is that I probably weekly get other people's Google Docs of their journeys. And it is so moving. And I think like in the context of traditional publishing, the project makes absolutely no sense. Like it's expensive. Like I pay for everything myself. There's no publisher. There's no distributor. There's no publicist. And so I sometimes get like pats on the head about my journey from friends of mine that are in the industry. It's like a kind of a cute project. But I think if anyone were in my shoes getting these emails from people and documents about the stuff that's like really happening in their lives, you would just like keep going forever. So the journey is forever, apparently.
Well, I mean, to kind of pick up on the quotes thing, that's why we can't have nice words anymore, because somebody will kind of use them in some way that will make us want to put them in quotes. But to pick up, I mean, it's funny when people in publishing business are kind of like being like, "Oh, this is not an actual project for us," and you're like, "Have you seen publishing?" It's it's a very it feels to me like a business that's actually kind of made for the kind of work you're doing, because it's very explorative, and you explored something for yourself and then created an artifact out of it so that people can experience at least some part of it. It's not the same thing, right? Like the linearity that a book kind of like requires, because it starts somewhere and ends somewhere. It's not necessarily reflective at all for the thing that you do. And I remember reading on your website is that you have not thought of yourself as someone who has a practice, an artistic practice. And that's something that resonated for me, because I think there's this idea that, some people are artists and some people are, doing something else. And I think, like for me at least, you managed to break down this notion that this is something exclusive to just the artistic kind of side of yourself. It is really a thing that you can bring to, your commercial kind of a way of, going about, but also like how you go about just generally in your life. And so I wanted to see where you land with this idea of having a practice and how it relates to how you publish.
Yeah, the practice is another word that I feel obligated to put into quotes all the time. Whenever I heard people talking about their practices, it sounded so pretentious, honestly, and certainly not something that was available to me as someone who was not an artist. As I said, I've been running an investment fund for the last 10 years in the kind of political tech world. I left that role in 2020, but still advise foundations and family offices in that space. And I think after having worked on this project, I think practice is such a great, expansive, accessible to anybody word, both sort of a noun and a verb. And I've got actually a newsletter called Practice Practice, which is just me sharing my practicing, having a practice, which I think has given me so much, both in terms of like outputs, I guess, but mostly it's like the process is the point. If you just keep at it for long enough, things happen. And I have come to believe now that everybody's creative. It's just like when you see children, all children sort of think they can draw until someone tells them otherwise, until someone tells them their scribble doesn't look like the horse that the child says it is. And I think everyone has that in them, but somehow we've been socialized, not everybody, obviously, but we've been socialized to sort of not think of ourselves as a creative. And to me, the way that we can access our creativity is just through practice. So I really now like it as a word. And I've sort of decided I have all sorts of things that are included in my practice, including writing emails to people that I don't know, or fan letters. I do it all the time. And not everybody responds, you know, but it sort of doesn't really matter. That's the practice.
Can you give people who haven't seen your project, the book,
or Jenny's book?
Yeah. Can you give us a bit more, a lot of an idea, like also like very practical, like what did you do? Like, what is your practice like? How can people imagine it?
Yeah. So, you know, Jenny's book came out in 2019. It's about the ways that the business model of the attention economy extracts our attention and suggests ways we might go about reclaiming and redirecting it towards nature, towards other people, towards ourselves. And so when my project started, it was just me writing down quotes that I wanted to remember. And then I started making little doodles around the quotes. And then because Jenny's book felt so relevant to this very intense time that we were in my case, I had moved out of Oakland and up to the Russian River with a 4-year-old and an 18-month-old with no childcare. And I had just left a job that I had been in for 10 years. And it was the summer of 2020, the summer of a racial reckoning in the United States, pandemic summer, lockdown. And I found these quotes from this book written the year before to be so relevant to my life. And so I started just writing almost like diary entries about the quotes and the pictures and the things that I was trying during that time, some of which were successful, like go for a walk without listening to a podcast, some of which were in retrospect completely inane. You know, I took so many classes online during the pandemic to try to just like get through. And the book in the end is like a scrapbook of that time that includes both the like watercolor class, but also includes grief. Like I had a miscarriage during that time when I was not with my community. And I remember thinking like, there's a line in the book where it's like, if a miscarriage happens in the forest, like, did it really happen? And it's like for me, it's like really important to remember all of it. This sort of like beautiful time I spent outside with my kids and my partner and my neighbors. The community we live in now is incredible and very close knit, and got even more so during the pandemic, and all of the grief that was happening during that time. So I think the honoring of both of those things is in part what other people respond to about the project, because I think I'll speak for myself. I'm a highly unreliable narrator of my past experiences. I tend to think of them as either way better or way worse than they really were. And so for me, the book report project is just an in real time, this is everything that was happening. And the project now, in many ways, is trying to give other people that experience, to remember. It's the 5-year anniversary this year of the beginning of the pandemic. And I find that most people have not stopped to reflect on how their lives have changed, both in good ways and in bad ways. And certainly in the US, we lack kind of collective rituals around memorialization. So although this project was a very hyper individual, personal project, the project now I think, is to make it more collective and to give access to other people, starting, with your original question around practice, to give people the like tools to practice remembering.
I have actually like a bunch of questions, but I want to kind of relate to the last part, because I, in my observation at least, I find it quite interesting that the pandemic as an event has almost no role in popular culture, right? At least in what I'm seeing. Like, obviously there were shows and movies during the pandemic that were specifically kind of like made through that lens of what is happening right now. But neither in music nor in, TV shows or movies, the event seems to have a historic lineage. So the characters are not referring to it. And there is a certain similarity, to me at least, to 9/11, because that too is basically never referred to specifically. And it seems like, and I wouldn't say like, I feel like, Johannes, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels to me like Europe isn't dealing any differently about it. Like, people are just basically pretending it never happened. And I noticed it in myself as well, right? Like, when you kind of go about and you're entering, a train or a station, and there's like one person wearing a mask, you're like, huh, right. And so we tend to, as the West at least, I don't know how it is in other places, it seems like we're trying to pretend that it never happened. And that's obviously a recipe for disaster, especially if it happens at the scale at which the pandemic, I mean, a pandemic is a pandemic, so that's why it's called that way. So I'm wondering, and this is like tying this back to the practice. And so for me, this is not, new to read a book and, highlight stuff or scribbles like on the side. But I never did what you did, like basically going back and forth and kind of basically in a like what seems to me a fairly short amount of time, right? Like, I revisit certain books, like I revisit finite and infinite games like basically every year. But I think like the way you approach this with it's not just reading it, it's really also externalizing your reaction in that moment. So there has become like another like lineage of, or another history that you're creating for yourself.
Yeah, I've sort of like three things to respond to that. I'll take them backwards. One is that I have become so interested in, and in some ways kind of evangelical, or maybe you all can tell your podcast listeners about it, about book reports as a form. In part because I am never going to read all the books that I want to read. I've never even heard of finite and infinite games. The fact that you read it every year, and now that I know you, like, I need your book report about it, because I'm for sure never going to read it, but I'm interested. And
she came with homework.
Yeah. And I'll hold you to it, actually.
I know now.
And so, and in part, I'm interested in the books that I'm never going to read, but I'm also interested. There are books that I want to know about, but in fact, they're like too academic, too long, I've got other things to do. I've got 2 kids. I've got a job. I've got my creative practice. But I am interested in that book mostly through the lens of the experience of someone I care about, who is passionate about that book or has some particular reason that that book is important to them, and might give me an entry point into that topic that I otherwise wouldn't have, and will help me remember that book better. Part of the reason that I copy things down is that I read a lot, I read quickly, and I retain very little. And so for me, getting book reports from other people about the books that matter to them is also a way for me to kind of access both the information in the book, but also what I really care about is the experience of these other people. And I have had, subsequent to sharing my project, a bunch of friends write book reports for me about books that matter to them. In one case, someone wrote a book report about a book that I had heard a ton about, but decided I didn't need to read because I thought I understood what it was about. And she wrote a book about Naomi Klein's book, Doppelganger. And reading the book report about the book made me go read that book. And I think it's one of the most important books I've read in the last 5 years. And so it's not just to get like the cliff notes of a thing. It is to sort of like give you an entry point that you didn't have about something that, like, again, I sort of thought I knew about. I was like, okay, Naomi Klein gets mistaken for Naomi Wolf. I get it. But that book is about so much more than that. And I would never have known that if my friend hadn't written a book report. So I'm here to like try to make book reports and fan nonfiction a thing. And I think there's a lot of promise to it. And yeah, so I'm just trying to tell everyone I know, tell everyone you know. The second thing is just about your comment about 9/11, is that one of the things I find so interesting about the 9/11 and pandemic sort of comparisons, and I was in New York for 9/11, but as Americans, so many people sort of like have a very visceral feeling about that experience. And I'm not trying to take away anyone's experience, but as compared to the pandemic actually happened to everyone. And so one of the things that I think is important about the kind of taking a minute, pausing, reflecting on your own experience is that it happened to everyone, and everyone's experience is worthy of memorialization. Like, through doing this project, I've become really interested in memorialization in general, what we kind of collectively deem worthy of memorialization. Memorialization, at least in the US, but I think in lots of places, is either like triumphalist or kind of like honoring victimization or something. And most of life's experiences is like somewhere in between all of those things. And usually people aren't either one or the other. And I have now, the way that I help other people memorialize their own pandemic experiences is that I do this zine workshop with people, and we make like 1-page zines. There's like a set of very simple prompts. And it is always so moving to be with people in that practice. Even people who are sort of like, I don't do that kind of thing. Like I'm not going back there. I have no desire to like remember that time. But in the act of doing it, you get to witness all of the ways in which people had experiences that they thought they were alone in, but in fact were shared, and the ways in which people's experiences really diverged. But even that is useful. So like, while some person is like baking sourdough or whatever, another person is grieving the loss of family members to COVID. And actually just getting to witness that in a room with people, I think is like, it's both very moving personally for me, but it also makes me realize how much, for me, more interesting and more true to life collective memorialization is than any individual memorialization we ever do about anything.
I mean, the listeners of this podcast, the episode before this, we did this thing where we reflect like on the month, and like usually like it happens at the end of the month. Now, because we were both traveling, it happened a little bit later. And I actually talked about, my experience going to the United States, like the way I'm thinking about when reading about all of it in the news, what's happening, and then arriving in the US. And the way we kind of like my kind of way of thinking about that was through the lens of Kurosawa's Rashomon, the movie from 1950, where four very distinct but very true in themselves versions of the same thing can be happening at the same time. And I think like what you're describing is very much also connected to exactly what he was, cunningly showing in this movie already. It's like there is no point in judging someone's experience. Like, it is true to them.
Yeah.
And there is no, in that context of either grief or trauma, there is no objective truth of what it
Exactly.
actually is. And he managed to capture that quite vividly, I think, in a movie. And I think what you're describing is exactly in that same lineage of memorialization happens in us first, and then it can happen on a collective level.
I've been thinking about that recently because people have recommended that I try to get reviews of the project, which strikes me as just such a funny thing to do. Like, is someone going to tell me my journal is good or bad? Like, I understand the point of reviews in generally around a more traditional book, but yeah, there's only, this is sort of like my experience and my reflection on it. And is I'm sort of interested in your experience and your reflection on it more than I am your judgment about whether my reflection was the right one or not.
Well, I mean, we're always saying like now, practice and review. I guess like the point, like sometimes you can do what is a review and what should a review be, and the way you described book reports, it's just as like if I have a resonance because I know that person. I have it differently. Johannes knows about this quite well. Like I tend to, whenever a book is really big, like if everyone is discussing it, there is a high chance I will not read it. Like, it's like, it basically creates in me like this, like, no, I'm not going to participate. And I know
You're
it's
not
kind of
gonna make me.
Yeah, it is. Like I would say, it's not. I'm not saying everybody should be doing this. Like I feel like almost it's a little bit childish, but it's almost like me not wanting to stand at the water fountain thing or like water cooler and discussing the same thing. I don't know what it is, but there is something to the fact that I like when Johannes recommends me something.
Yeah.
Although he goes through far more books than I do. And I can't keep up with him. So I kind of appreciate when he kind of like says something about a book and I can basically do whatever you do like with it. So, but I guess like the point of the review is like, I mean, we didn't review your project, but we thought it was interesting enough to get you on the podcast so that we can talk about it. So in a way, that is the review in itself.
Yeah, and I didn't review Jenny's book in the end,
Yeah.
right? That's like
Yeah.
another a sort of one thing people do with books is review them. I could have said I could have posted a review. I'm not on Goodreads. Maybe I have an account, but I've never used it. But I could have just read Jenny's book and posted my review of it in Goodreads. And I don't find that particularly interesting, although I know people sort of use them in that way. The other thing just to say about I do think there is something childish about the like if everybody's talking about it, I'm not going to. I share that impulse, but I also think the way that the publishing industrial complex, I was a film distributor for many years, that, media industrial complex more generally, is that a very few number of books get anointed as the ones that everyone should be talking about. And so, usually those books did not have me in mind, me and my interests in my particular subject position in mind when they were telling me that I should read them. And so I think of it as not just a kind of childish impulse, but a way to kind of retain agency over my own likes, which is how I found out about you all in the first place, is when you interviewed Kyle Chayka. So I think the sort of personal curation and taking a sort of like stand, developing your own taste and sharing that with other people. Sometimes I have this suspicion that there's more of us out there, but if we're not sort of controlling the like which of those books gets anointed, then it feels as if we should all be reading a thing that in fact in private or in group chat or on text threads everybody agrees is nonsense.
There's an interesting thread here. So we keep repeating this thing where we put words in air quotes. And I find it really interesting that because there's this idea also of like reclaiming words. Like so it's a practice. Like so you immediately have like, I mean, it's very easy in Berlin to imagine the people who say, oh, I have this practice, and you can see them at like 10 in the morning in a coffee shop drinking matcha lattes and talking about their practice.
It's like Silver Lake.
Yeah, the really interesting part here for me is how much of your own practice, especially in the beginning, was about unlearning instead of like finding something like more like, oh, I can approach this differently. So I don't have to write a review or put a photo on it on Instagram and say great stuff. Like how much, or did it feel like an unlearning and then a relearning of what it was actually about? Like how, because what I find so interesting, like you said, the process of you didn't start with the end in mind. You just started and then you found your way forward through life and circumstances. And so I'm really interested in these unlearning, because I think that's what keeping us all from doing a lot of that, is that we have these strong words in mind. That's not for me. Or creativity, that's not for me. Or practice, I'm not an artist and stuff like that. So I think we have to unlearn a bit to actually go down that road.
I so appreciate you're using that word, which I also would have put in air quotes probably. I think the entire project is a project about unlearning, even from the fact that I would give myself the time and space to work on it. I am like a classic type A overachiever, good schools, kind of outcome oriented person. I like to be efficient. I like to get things done. I like to make things happen. I am not the kind of person that would do something that had no point. And yet I found myself, I don't have a meditation practice, but I find that people who do have a meditation practice, when I describe the project, sort of find something similar in what I was doing, which was essentially like leaving my house, coming to this shed, spending a little bit of time every day making these doodles. And it became something I really looked forward to, not because I thought I was going to publish the book, but just because I wanted to do it. And I found so much pleasure in doing it and so much value for myself. Like making something by hand puts you so much in your body and has you paying such close attention to what you're doing, that whatever that flow state is that people read books to get to actually just gets you there. And the other thing as it relates to the unlearning is that in so many ways, I was doing this for myself. And I think the book would have looked so different if I said, I'm setting out to make a book about putting the ideas of doing nothing into practice. And there's a kind of joke structure to the book, which is 12 strategies that you can use. It's like very decidedly not what Jenny is up to in that book. But it's also that in order to remember any of these things in my life, I kind of need them to be in a listicle that I can just like open the book and be like, oh yeah, go for a walk. But I have become so convinced now that doing something just for myself, keeping things in the book that an editor would have absolutely taken out, and probably should have or something, is exactly what makes the book interesting to not everyone, but to a very, very specific group of people. It's just this sort of like generalization of like the more specific you are, the more universal something can be. And I've now found that in practice. And all of that is about unlearning all of the reasons to do something, the reasons to keep going with something. Sometimes while I was working on the project, there is a certain kind of person who needs a lot of reasons for you to be doing anything. And so to those people, I would say, oh, I'm working on a book. And then it would seem like a legitimate use of time. To people who I thought would get it, sometimes I'd say like, I'm working on a zine. Even now that I'm still working on the project, there are people that are kind of mystified by my continued sort of devotion to it. And to those kind of people, I have found the analogy to golf to be really useful. Like if they play golf, I sort of say like, it takes you a lot of time. You are not planning to become a professional golfer. It's expensive. You can do it alone. You do it with your friends and it gives you something, right? And they're like, oh yeah. I'm like, so it's like my golf habit.
How would you say it's different from a hobby? So that's the first like term that kind of came to mind for me. Is it like a hobby, or is there
I don't think
something
it's
where
all
say,
that different. The
yeah,
only I think it's a hobby.
yeah,
The only place where, and I think maybe this is true uniquely maybe about publishing, and I'm learning as I spend more time with people, because a lot of people do make books for sort of like personal brand purposes or to get big ideas out in the world. It bumps up against a kind of it like professionalization or something that was not at all my intention. I'm not, it's kind of still not my intention, but it overlaps a little bit. And in some ways in my own life, I'm someone who historically has had a lot of boundaries between my professional world and my personal world. And now that I have this project, those are shifting, and I think probably productive and good for me kind of ways. And it does, yeah, it just gives me access to people in a totally different way. So even though it's a really personal project, some of the people that have responded to it most strongly are people that I know in a purely professional context. Like someone that was on my board for years. We now only talk about poetry, and it's amazing.
So I'm gonna thread the thing that Johannes kind of like unleashed on us, and so unlearning seems almost like an act of rebellion. And I think like like us not wanting to read that book that everybody is talking about, there seems to be a certain kind of trait or like something going on where some people are more keen on trying to put the effort to go against the grain. And while you were basically talking, and also like, so hobby is also an interesting word. Like it shouldn't be derogatory, but it has like a connotation to it where if you have a hobby, it actually means that you're not hustling enough or something like that.
Or you're not
Like,
serious, as you
or
just
you're
said
not
it.
serious.
Yeah, I wanted to take it back and say, no, but it's really serious. I take it
Yeah, yeah.
seriously.
Yeah, exactly. And that, those words, again, the quotation marks and stuff like
Yeah.
that, like they are being, reframed depending on, the culture in which we are kind of currently in. And there is a lot of different perspectives on what it actually is. And like I actually didn't think about unlearning, but the way I kind of, like the question that I sometimes phrase is, how do we start loving something new? Like, but do it consciously, like, because usually what we do is like we talk about establishing a new routine, which is a practice of making something a thing that you don't have to think about. Like, if you run often enough, going for a run isn't as painful. You're not questioning it anymore. It just becomes this thing that you're doing, and it becomes both easier and you get more out of it. And so the love that you have for running is not the thing that when you fall in love or when you start dating or something. It's actually the thing that you're like, I'm in love, and you're committed to something, and then you can actually do it for a very long time because you don't have to question it, because it becomes just a thing that is just part of you. And so, I mean, I don't necessarily have a point, but like, I'm just kind of wondering how unlearning and those things are connected to each other, and how do we, manage, like, what did it take for you to suspend your disbelief in, from going to not having a practice to having a practice? That's I guess is like the question at hand.
I think I want to go back to the beginning of it also, but the the question sort of supposes that the belief was suspended or something. I think one of the hallmarks of my own practice and process and project is a continual wondering, why am I doing this again? What is the point of this? So for me,
it's
of
much
my
closer. It's much closer to my own experience of running.
yeah, exactly.
I've been doing this for 2 years. Why the
Yeah,
hell are I doing this?
exactly. And I think that for me, it's very important to make that part of it visible. I believe that there are some people who sort of know and have the faith and all of that stuff. I'm not one of those people. And I think that's much more relatable for people who don't think of themselves as creative. And I don't want to, because I have this, like, there's like an object, you know, I have something to show for myself. There's sort of ironically a deliverable out of this whole project.
Provide no
Provide
deliverables.
no deliverables. Again, there's sort of like lots of contradictions. I think life is full of contradictions. And so I don't want anyone to ever take away from my sharing about this project that I quit my job, moved to the country, started a practice, and I've figured out how to reclaim my attention. It is, again, the journey is for the rest of our lives. And we are going to be
No, but
wrestling with these things forever.
no, but let me interrupt you here. But like my question is, I guess, to a certain degree, do you think you would have picked up this practice if you wouldn't have moved
No,
out of Auckland
no,
and
100% no.
and that's like, I guess to a certain degree, circumstances have
Yeah,
collided for you to make a
yeah,
choice and be
yes,
able to make that choice.
yes, absolutely.
That facilitates the geographic and density context in which you can, um, allow yourself to do this.
100%. It wouldn't have happened without a pandemic. I mean,
Yeah,
that's the sort
yeah.
of like very the poignant part of it for me is that I had already planned on leaving my job. I had been in it for 10 years. I had worked really hard to find a successor. What I thought I was going to do was do a 6-month walkabout and then go run another fund. And this thing happened that kept me interested. And but I do think so. There's a whole bunch of circumstances. You know, I was partnered, I'm able-bodied, I can get freelance work. There's all of these things that colluded to make it possible for me to work on this. And I think it's very possible to do a little bit, even in the circumstances in which you are in a city trying to manage childcare and a full-time job. And that can look as simple as taking 5 minutes of each day and writing. It can be going for a walk without listening to a podcast. It can be to go back to your initial observations about loving something new. I have an answer for you about that. The way to love something new is to ask someone else what they love. I think the reason that I am getting on the receiving end now of like a Google Doc a week about what someone loves is because I shared this project, which I had not I think what I thought I was going to do was like print a copy from me, print a copy for my parents, print a copy for Jenny, and like move on with my life. But through a bunch of different circumstances, I was asking for feedback from people, and I had sent a digital version of the project to a friend of mine who asked if she could send it to another friend. And I had originally said, absolutely not. Like, this should not be read by anyone who doesn't like know and love me and forgive my, to talk about another word that we should take back, self-indulgence. I was really just nervous about the project being perceived as self-indulgent. Who do I think I am? I'm just like moving to the country and working on my art practice while the world is burning. And that person who I did not know, who lived in New Zealand, who I'd never met, turned out to be the single most comprehending reader of this project, who understood the project and the reasons why I was working on it better than I did, and sent me back a 17-page book report about the book report. And about all of the things that she loved, which in turn made me interested in new things. So in some ways, the sharing of the project is a kind of numbers game about finding new things to love. Every time I share it. Maybe I shouldn't say every time I share it, but it's like the more people I share it with, the higher the likelihood that it finds someone who it speaks to. And then I'm less interested, honestly, in what they think about my project. I keep going with it because I get to learn what they're thinking about themselves.
I think like it's time to use the most air quotable word of them all, and it
Which
is
one?
authenticity.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah.
But like it's like I find that I notice it more and more again. I don't know what is actually happening in terms of people
It's
and
kind of come
even
full circle.
yeah, it feels to me like
Huh.
that at least. In the sense that what you're describing, like when you said, when somebody else loves something, you kind of start, you pick up on that. And I think that in a way is authentic because like actual love is authentic. It doesn't need explanation or anything
Yeah.
like that. You
Yeah.
know it when you see it.
Absolutely.
And we see a lot of performative stuff. And then once in a while we see the actual stuff, and the people who kind of like basically like if you know it, you kind of like, oh yeah, this is different. Like this is not the same thing. But it becomes harder to do so because the distribution channels that we all participate in are like, and that connects to Kyle's work, like everything is being flattened. And so
Yeah.
even the most authentic experiences placed in an order of other things that are just purely marketing or purely fake or purely performative, it becomes harder to distinguishing the actual thing from the fake thing. And I wonder, like, I mean, you're doing you're doing an effort. Like, I agree with you because based on your email, usually, like, if someone would send us an email like, oh, this is an awesome podcast, I'm like, okay, that's fine. I will reply. It's not like, thank you. But your email made me want to look at your project and made me want to talk to you. And I think the effort that we put into something and, being vulnerable, being authentic, through vulnerability, we were becoming authentic, I guess. And I think like that is the only thing that we can probably use to cut through the kind of media context in which we're recording this podcast. It will be put on YouTube. It will be on Spotify. It will be posted on LinkedIn as well. Like, it is participating in those same systems.
Yeah, I have found, I don't know about you all and your own media consumption at the moment, but I have been trying to be pretty mercenary about where I participate and where I don't. And I'm really resisting the urge to use air quotes, the most authenticity I find. I'm like, my wrists are on the table. The most authenticity. And I think that the reason I feel okay right now is because all of my chatter is happening in my NBA group chat and in the Google Docs, in the comments of the Google Docs that people are sending to me, or in kind of a random Discord. And I'm not really refreshing the homepage of whatever news site I probably was before. Um, and so I think the beauty of that is that I feel like I'm having authentic, connected relationships, and the things that I'm hearing about feel real. And um, the 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 negative of that is that um, it's happening at a very small scale, and I am really trying to resist the fetishization of scale, having it mean something about the culture. Like, I have to be okay that I'm distributing my book basically one-on-one, um, as opposed to sort of one to many.
I think what fascinates me so much listening to you and looking at the project. I mean, there's some obvious things like I think the reemergence of authenticity or something like that has a lot to do with AI and all the slop
Mm.
and we don't know really what's authentic anymore, and so unless it's like really handmade and has more effort than needed, which is an interesting part. But again, I'm constantly, like, in our conversation, I'm observing myself, like my trend pattern recognition system is going berserk. It's like, oh, this is interesting. This is a counter reaction to this and stuff like that. And it's so hard to resist that, to put everything into basically like a trend briefing of here's something interesting is happening. And so what I find so fascinating, and I'm so interested in, how did you resist for so long, like all the opportunities of, oh, I'm not going to turn this into this, or I'm not going to publish it here, I'm going to take it there. Because I think that's what's happening to a lot of like these projects that just start as like a hobby or something like that. Comes in and like, why not do an Instagram channel on that and promote it a bit and send it to more people and see what happens? Why not make shirt with fan nonfiction or something? All of this, like, where you're like, it's so easy. Come on, promote it. And that's what I find so interesting, because what I'm seeing from your project is you you resisted that. You kept following your curiosity, and new stuff happens and keeps happening, and it goes from one phase to the next phase to the next phase, and it never really like fades out, because you never have like a saturation of it with like a commercial thing. So how did you do it? How are you still doing the resistance?
The first way I did it is that I was not on social media for 3 years. Because I was working freelance and I didn't need to be there for my job anymore, I just wasn't there. And, the pandemic helped with that. And I had no childcare. So I was like with my kids in the woods, and I needed to be present. But I think probably in retrospect, that helped to sort of answer your question. I do think that, I mean, who knows? Maybe you haven't seen the t-shirt yet. I don't want to like, I don't think I'm making t-shirts, but like, it feels so like record scratch for this project. So there's something about it just like doesn't totally make sense. But there are like provide no deliverables posters or whatever that someone can get only if they happen to come to my house. So I think there is, it's just more fun to do it this way. Like, I remember when I was trying to figure out how many books to print, because I was only ever printing. They're expensive to print. They're oversized. I never wanted to get stuck with any. So I was only printing them 20 or 30 at a time. And that's also incredibly stupid and doesn't make a ton of sense. And so I was just trying to figure out what is the right number to print at scale that would be sort of sellable, that wouldn't end up in my parents' basement, that could reach an audience. And it was so difficult to get anybody to tell me how many books sell, like from, say, like an independent individual already, even with all the caveats. I'm not trying to make the New York Times bestseller list. It was so difficult to get that number. And eventually I sort of like picked something in the middle. And if I think about how much delight and I ship them out myself, so I know exactly who has bought the book, and that eventually I probably will make it available to like get on through Ingram or whatever. But if I'm not going to sell 1,000,000 books anyway, it's so much better to be like thinking about the handwriting the name of the person getting the book. And there's 500 of them, and I'm essentially know almost all of them. And I think if I were doing it some other way with the t-shirts and the bags, I'd be trying to optimize some SEO or whatever. That's like what I would be spending my time doing in the interest of a scale that I would never reach anyway.
Here's two small things that keep on going, I guess.
And
it says in the conversation, I mean, I don't think it would be bad if you would have it great t-shirt, right? Like, I don't think that's per se a bad thing. And if you would distribute the t-shirts the same way you distribute the books, it's, I think, totally fine. It's the problem that happens every time certain mechanics take over a perfectly fine thing, and make it into something that it wasn't supposed to be, but through those acts of resistance, did you manage to start for yourself, and also manage, by telling the story here, telling it in other contexts, definitely inspired me to think about establishing a practice. And really, I live in a city, but I'm fortunate to live in one of those socialist places where childcare is free, and we can have some flexibility, and there's opportunity to, I guess, contrary to places like the United States, where it's just easier, I guess, to start a practice, and that luxury that we have here because of certain things, we should embrace by actually using for what it actually allows us to do. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of, I think, a way to close this off. Not the conversation in general. I feel like we're going to have more on this. And we didn't even talk about curiosity, right? Like, we didn't even mention that. So there is definitely a thread to pick up at some other point. Christy, thank you so much.
Thank you both so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for making the time to listen to Follow the Rabbit. Please let us know your thoughts and suggestions by sending an email to ftr@knownunknowns.xyz. Like the episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. And most of all, share the episode with others who might find it interesting. It really helps us out. Thank you so much for listening in. Talk to you soon.